can't make myself any clearer.
But that's simply not possible. And I don't find this funny anymore.
It never was supposed to be. Why isn't it possible?
It's just not.
Why not, you stupid bastard?
The Suffering is the name that really should have been given to the game Eternal Sonata, because sitting through that opening cutscene is a form of torture. Worse, if your PlayStation locks up before you get to the first save station, you have to endure it all over again. Maybe I should be thankful that I lost the disc for that game over a decade ago and all I have left is the box. Either way, today we're talking about The Suffering, a lesser-known PlayStation 2 horror title. I say horror title, but to be honest though, it felt more like an action game with horror elements. Actually, in the making of the script for this video and revising it, I actually discovered that the game was partially intended as an action game, so I guess the title isn't the only thing that's misleading about the game, is it? The game came out on the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox back in 2004, with a GameCube port planned, but cancelled eventually. Once again, good old Ninty taking the big stinking L. The GameCube really was the peak of third-party companies just passing on the big N, wasn't it? I mean, the N64 was technically the start of that, but the impact really started to be felt in the GameCube days. Though some would argue that the Wii was the biggest of Nintendo's consoles to get the shaft by a third party, and we don't talk about the Wii U. Anyway, The Suffering was developed by Surreal and published by Midway Games, both of which would go bankrupt only 5 years later. From making games, dusting off resumes, I suppose. I actually went into this game assuming it was going to be extremely mediocre, not even worthy of video. But I needed something to fill in the gap between this and the next game I'm covering, which is taking a lot longer than expected because I'm absolutely garbage tier at video games, and I struggle to get good after working at a real people job for over 50 hours a week. Plus, I've been listening to your comments about how my videos absolutely suck, and I do work harder for your amusement. What I got though was pleasantly surprising, as I found out this game was actually a commercial success, albeit a smaller time than other games for sure. The Suffering went on to sell 1.5 million copies and justified a sequel for itself, so that's pretty impressive for a smaller time horror action title. For horror games in general, these are actually pretty good numbers by 2000 standards. The game actually holds up fairly well, and if you're looking for a game to play between others, this one isn't a half bad choice. You could be doing worse things with your time, that's for sure, and here's a list of those worst things. The Suffering, despite its name, is a real treat to play. It may not be the best of its kind, and it certainly has some awkward design choices, but you'll actually have a good time with this game. Not a better time than playing Chrono Trigger, mind you, but few can pass that bar. Okay, you can roll the Chrono Trigger clip now. It's not a mystery that I love horror games, especially from the 2000s, because it was just an experimental time for the genre. It's always a wild adventure to see what they cooked up to compete with Capcom and Konami before they decided they hated money and crapped out Silent Hill Downpour. I feel like anytime I mention a game in these videos, there will eventually be an expectation that I review said game, so if people really want me to play that game, I suppose you can leave a comment begging me to play it, which I'll promptly ignore said comment. I'm just kidding, I'll actually buy a copy and make a video on it if people really want me to. With the price of PlayStation 2 games starting to skyrocket at the time of making this video, I actually can't blame people for even using emulators at this point. It's really sad to say, but one of the best eras in video games, especially for this genre, is at serious risk of not being played by modern gamers due to lack of access. I really think Sony should get to work on some kind of emulation service for these games, but that's probably a topic for another video. Back on the topic of the game though, get ready for some fairly mature visuals because this game is pretty gory, though I'm sure by today's standards there's nothing to look at as most of the blood looks like your mouth filled with Gatorade that you spritzed at someone. But if you use your imagination, this game is actually pretty graphic in some of its death sequences. There's beheadings, impalements, and even people being set ablaze to look forward to. All those PlayStation 2 level graphics of yesteryear. If any of that bothers you, the door is right over there. Now that all of them are gone, for those that choose to say, we can finally talk about why I love Ike. We can finally discuss The Suffering. The game, that is, not that other thing. Hot damn, these graphics are ugly as sin by today's standard, that's for sure. But they have a strange charm to them. There's something about this time period in gaming where games didn't need to have this very realistic look to them. Though I'm sure if you looked at Silent Hill 2, you'd probably be finding this game to fail to achieve any sign of scary effect simply because it looks ugly by comparison. But hey, Torgue's strange nose is definitely a sight to strike fear into your heart. Outside of the NPCs and human models looking ridiculous though, the enemies are quite well designed, and they resemble all different forms of execution to fit with the game's theme of being in prison, because that's essentially what this is all about. You're on death row trying to survive as monsters overtake the prison. It's actually a pretty cool and unique concept because it makes you have to wonder if you can actually trust other prisoners or even the COs when you're trying to escape. Though, admittedly, that doesn't come into play as much as you'd think. Though it should have. Definitely a missed opportunity there. There's a few areas to explore, including the caves below, the old World War II bunker, or even the abandoned psych ward. There's enough variety to keep you entertained too, and since it doesn't overstay its welcome, you never really feel like you get bored of anything. The enemies are where it's at though, and they have some great designs, the stuff of nightmares, that's for sure. And they have plenty of gnarly killing scenes, unique mechanics for each one of them too. The note system of the game is quite stylized too, having a notebook that you can refer back to learn about its enemies, all with voice acting as well. That's actually quite well done.
Contained in these pages are my observations of the bizarre creatures that have appeared on Carnate Island since the cataclysm struck.
I will say though that a lot of areas are pretty dark, so you might have a hard time being able to really appreciate some of the areas. And finding light switches can be a challenge in the dark, as there's rarely an indicator to tell you what can even be interacted with. I only got stuck a handful of times though, because most of the time the levels are designed in a way to where you kind of know what to do just by looking at them. But I have to admit, there are a few that will make you scratch your head at some of the poor design choices. Such as an area that you have to know to jump out of it, but you can't really see the jumpable area too well. Or perhaps the most egregious being a section late in the game where you have to use a car jack. This part is really crappy because it's not like the damn thing stands out in any way, nor does anything indicate you can even interact with it. And to make it worse, they have the path in the other direction that triggers a cutscene that leads to nowhere. It's like they designed this part solely to get you stuck, or maybe sell a strategy guide. Were people even really buying strategy guides by 2004 anymore? See, back before the internet was huge and before we had access to video streaming online, we often relied on physical printed strategy guides to get through tougher games. They sort of fizzle out of style though, because there's really not much point to them beyond just collector's value now. I actually used to have a few of them myself, and I still have the collector's edition strategy guide for Black Ops 3 of all games. Go figure. I don't even think I've ever cracked it open either. Another area where I got turned around was closer to the end of the game, where you're running back to the death house from the start of the game. For some reason, I got turned around so many times on my way back here because this area connecting to just wasn't straightforward in my opinion. Or I'm just bad at games. It's possible the second one's true. Still, it's at least not a where the hell do I go kind of situation for 95% of the game, and you're rarely given some kind of ridiculous scenario that requires you to do some kind of logic that only someone with infinite free time and a different brain to figure out. It's good though, because that means the game isn't padded out with tons of meaningless crap that was just designed to waste your time. Most of the areas in the game feel like they're connected and have a reason to be there. One common complaint I hear about Resident Evil, for example, is that it seems like you end up somewhere that's absolutely disconnected from where you started by the end of the games. But not here. You're given kind of a good rundown of where you'll likely end up early in, and nothing really feels out of place. The entire game is contained in an island where the prison is, which in my opinion was a smart move to hone in your vision. Everyone these days seems to be wanting to make these huge open world games with all sorts of ambitious ideas that just come off as half-cooked in the end. And it usually results in a game where you're just wandering around seeing a big empty wasteland for hours on end with terrible load times. The idea of a linear game has become somewhat taboo, and yes, I'm aware I made Final Fantasy XIII for its linearity, but come on, that game is taking the piss by being a literal hallway with no exploration. The Suffering gives you places you can explore by progressing, and while you don't usually find much beyond ammo, health, or the occasional note that adds to the background story, you never really felt like you're just doing is holding the control stick forward. It helps that there is not a boring cutscene that pops up every time you move more than the length of a fly's butthole, too. I know I rag on Final Fantasy XIII a lot, but seriously, go play it and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about if my video about it wasn't enough to convince you. Back on the subject of the Suffering though, I would say that it's linearity done correctly. You're given enough to explore without overwhelming you with countless options of locations that lead to absolutely nothing of interest. Everything also feels like it's an organic part of the prison and not just a random room created solely to facilitate the game. That's kind of what I like in games where the environment feels lived in, and it's where everything feels like it has some kind of purpose to it. The enemies are definitely where the game shines though. Though I'll admit they slacked in the boss department in that there really aren't many outside of the final boss really. It feels really strange not to encounter boss enemies in an action horror game. Imagine if Resident Evil you didn't really fight anything but general enemies until you walk into the final room and get messed up by a tyrant. It's a really odd design choice, but maybe they didn't have the budget. Who knows? Apparently though, the game was actually hyped up back in the day, and while it was a commercial success, it somehow faded in obscurity when the PlayStation 3 hit the scene. It's a shame because this is a really fun game under here, and if you've seen the slop that I've played for this channel, you know that I don't make that statement lightly, especially when I hold Chrono Trigger to the gold standard. It really is perplexing how a game that is actually pretty damn good and did so well sales-wise, even got a sequel just pitters off into nothing. Oh wait, that's also like Chrono Trigger, isn't it? In all seriousness though, I thoroughly enjoyed the games. Its visuals may have been a bit dated, but they're still entertaining to look at. If you have to choose between staring at a dog turd for hours on end or this game, I would recommend you choose this game. But if your choice is between the dog turd and Eternal Sonata, pick the dog turd. I already know I'm going to get a bunch of Eternal Sonata fans in the comments section, aren't I? Look, it's a preference thing, okay? The controls are... they're not great. But not the worst I've encountered, that's for sure. The Suffering definitely has somewhat of an awkward control scheme to get used to, which I feel like I find myself saying with every PS2 game I cover. It's weird that I love this era so much when it has some of the most dated controls. It's not exactly tank style, but it's kind of strange. Basically, your right stick controls the camera like most games, but your character also turns with the camera, which feels a bit awkward to get used to. It's not exactly fluid, but I find myself getting used to it after a little while. This does result in the shooting mechanics being a little strange, as you'll find that hitting the monsters isn't exactly as simple as pointing at them and firing with the reticles turned red. But fortunately the game's hit detection is slightly generous and has a bit of auto-aim to make up for it. Though you will find yourself shooting at nothing quite often, it's a little bit on the floaty side, but not bad to be completely unplayable, that's for sure. One of the coolest aspects is you can actually enter first-person mode and the entire game can be played this way. So if you really want to, you can make a really awkward FPS game and pretend you're playing like a bad version of Quake or something. I wouldn't recommend playing the entire game this way, it's a bit more awkward than the standard controls, but this feature can come in handy during combat sequences and even for puzzle solving, as it'll give you a better look around you so you can see that if you're missing something important. Plus, overall, I think it's pretty cool, and it predates the Elder Scrolls doing it, though admittedly the Elder Scrolls did it with a lot more bugs. Also, I wouldn't recommend the melee options as they don't feel quite right. Something about them just makes it feel like you're swinging air a lot of the time and you just can't hit a damn thing. There's only two options anyway, the Shiv, which is hilariously huge, like, for real, how did they even sneak this thing into prison? And the Fire Axe, which admittedly they give you so late in the game that it's almost useless by the time you get it. It sort of reminds me of Episode 1 in Half-Life 2 where you get the crowbar so late in the game by the time it's almost half over. It really makes no sense, to be honest. Fortunately, these are minor problems because Abbott Penitentiary has so many firearms available with crate loads of ammo that you'll never really find yourself out of firepower. Like, it's actually laughable how the COs are even getting taken out when they have access to this many guns and bullets. Evidently, most of them don't know how to use them, or they're just too much of sniveling cowards.
You're not gonna kill me! What a relief. I've been running so long.
This is what differentiates it from other titles at the time, because you usually have enough firepower to get the job done, and you're rarely scrounging for resources, except maybe on the harder difficulties. You've got pretty cool enemy roll call as well, with Slayers being your default bread and butter enemy, representing those that are killed by blades in prison, and they attack with simple swings, but be careful because the handful of sections in the game where they will spawn infinitely if you don't get rid of their spawn point by shining searchlights on it. There's Marksmen, the embodiment of people killed by firing squad, and they're these big lugs with range attacks, but fortunately they're not as tanky as they look, and they usually go down with a handful of shots even from your revolver. Then there's more complex enemies such as the Festers, the suffering spirits of slave traders who let the slaves get eaten by rats. They're pretty annoying in that the gunfire won't kill them and they die only by explosives. Then they send a swarm of rats to attack you. They're super irritating, but fortunately they only appear in a handful of sections of the game. The most irritating enemy by far has to be the Inferna. Not only do they set fire to the ground around them, causing massive fire damage, they have this weird mechanic that you don't know about unless you look at their journal entry that if you don't shoot their ashes that they leave behind when they die, they just come right back. The only saving grace these things have is that they appear so late in the game you have to deal with them that often. There are a few others, but I won't spoil everything the game has to offer. Shockingly, there isn't much in the way of bosses in the game. Like I said before, there's only really 3, and 2 of them are more like puzzles than actual boss fights. The final boss is pretty lame too, if I'm honest. There isn't much to write home about here. It's no Lavos, that's for sure. The weapons are okay, I guess. I mean, there aren't really that many. You get a revolver, which becomes obsolete once you get the dual revolvers, a Tommy gun, a shotgun, and if you're thorough, you can build a flamethrower if you manage to find the parts. There's also a joke weapon called the Gonzo gun, which is literally just a chicken that squeezes eggs out of its ass. I wish I was making that up. Variety is certainly lacking in the weapons department, but that's okay. I'd rather a handful of weapons done really well rather than a plethora of weapons most of which don't even have any use. Games like Daikatana showed us that less is more sometimes. I can't help but think of games like Doom 3 which had weapons like the grenades which were designed so badly that they rarely worked properly. They were really only useful for splash damaging yourself to death, to be honest. You have side weapons such as TNT, Molotovs, and grenades, but I find myself not really needing them that much, except against the Festers, of course. The weapons you're given are sufficient enough to where you really don't have to rely on explosives. Then you have your insanity meter, which, if you fill it up, you can turn into this thing? I'm not really sure what this is supposed to be, but it absolutely eviscerates everything in your path, and it's awesome. Unfortunately, you don't want to use it too much because it lowers your morality meter. Oh yeah, that's another feature I have to talk about. Throughout the game, you come across moments where you get to choose to help various NPCs, and thus you're given good morality indicated by a blue meter. If you do evil crap, though, it goes down. This is used to determine the ending of the game, and there's 3 endings, one for being neutral, one for being good, and one for being evil. It's pretty straightforward, but it's also super hilarious that voices try to convince you to do the evil option.
He'll help you if you keep him safe.
He's weak.
Now, the only idea I have is that we gotta call for help.
You can play the game multiple times to get the different endings, or you can just use a cheat code to play with your morality to brute force the endings. What's interesting is this means that scenes that play out differently if you kill NPCs instead of help them, so it might be worth playing it just to see how this changes the game. Sadly, to my understanding though, the changes are far from major. Mechanically, this game works fine outside of its awkward movement, but again, we're all a little awkward at times, aren't we? It's pretty fun, and that's really the important thing to say about it. The game is fun to play, even if it has its moments. Admittedly, I abridge the hell out of the story sections of my videos because I don't think many want to have a long lore explanation, myself excluded from that group of course, because I would be lying if I said I didn't watch over 3 hours of Half-Life lore multiple times. It's actually pretty hard to trim down the story of an entire game to a single section of a video, and in this game's case, it isn't that much different, so try to pay attention because I'm going to hit on the few key points here. You play as Torque, a Neanderthal-looking fellow sent to Abbott Penitentiary just off the coast of Maryland. You've been sentenced to death for murdering your wife and children, and you're kind of the talk of the town when you first arrive.
Willie's bed isn't even cold yet, and already they brought in a new guy.
I heard he killed his old lady and kids. Sick motherf***.
Be quiet, you jerry-curled fool. Don't you know who that is?
Why should I?
That's Torque, the man himself.
It's not long after your arrival that suddenly the prison becomes overrun by demons of those previously executed at the prison. You grab a comically large shiv and begin to make your escape. That's essentially the premise here. You're trying to find a way off the island, but you have to survive the onslaught of demons while you're at it, all while enduring flashbacks of your family and hallucinations that make it unclear of what is real and what isn't at times. What I find really odd here is that there isn't much reason as to why suddenly demon monsters have overrun the prison, unless I missed something crucial, which I actually went back and checked various websites to see if there's actually a reason for this happening, and no, to my understanding, I don't think there actually is, though I could be wrong. An earthquake happens and opens up a rift to hell itself, I suppose, but to be fair, many games have stories that are only there to justify killing lots of monsters, right? Doom is all about that life, and we love it. I mean, okay, I love it. If you don't love it, then there's probably something wrong with you. Given that your player character is silent, it's hard to tell if you're actually innocent of the crime that you were sent to prison for or not, and the game makes this ambiguous all the way up to the end, even. You get a lot of background information about the prison too, such as being a former World War II bunker, even a slaver ship arriving on the island a few centuries ago, though I'm not quite sure how it's still there. Many forms of executions were done on this island, and the monsters you have to face take the forms of these executions. Ultimately though, your goal ends up being to restore power to the radio tower, to radio for help, turn on a lighthouse, and then make it to the docks for rescue, all while avoiding everything trying to put you in an early grave. Along the way, you'll meet many asking for your help, which you can either assist or ignore or just blow their heads off if you're some kind of maniac. The story isn't too much to write home about, but it keeps itself interesting with the constant hallucinations and questions on whether Torque is guilty or not. You even get plenty of supplemental material as you progress through the story with journals and notes which are even narrated. The big monster that you can turn into, it's implied that it's all in your head and you actually just black out and get fueled by adrenaline, which could be an explanation for how Torque killed his family, but then again, even the notes claiming it's all in your head could be a lie, and this could be in your head too. It's kind of a chicken or an egg situation, I suppose. It's all enough to justify a game, as I said earlier, and at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, really. I wouldn't call it anything groundbreaking. It has some interesting bits, that's for sure. My favorite has to be the multiple demons of past victims of the prison being the game's version of boss battles, such as Hermes, who's an executioner who went crazy and locked himself in the gas chamber to end himself. Now he's a demon that's composed entirely of gas. Or Oris, a murderer who was killed by the electric chair. My only real complaint though is that there isn't really any bosses outside the final one where you actually use your weapons to fight them, and even the final one you kind of just throw energy balls at them. That's probably the biggest letdown, is that the skills you've built up over time during the game don't really get tested. But then again, we don't always get what we want in life, otherwise I'd be playing a Chrono Trigger remake right now. If you have good enough morality, then by the end of the game, because you helped as many people as you could, you get the good ending, where Torque is rescued and told that he's potentially looking at a new trial. There's a neutral and a bad ending as well, but I'll leave those for you to explore because we have to move on, and I like to leave a little mystery in these videos. In an ocean of modern games that have let people down story-wise, it's interesting to see what games did back then with how little story was needed to justify what was happening so long as the game was fun. That's the key thing here, fun, and the suffering is kind of fun. I wouldn't put up there with playing Doom, like I said, but you won't hate what you're playing. Shy of a few parts where you may get stuck on what to do. I know I often stiff you guys on story when it comes to games, but there isn't really that much to show here, I promise. The story is short and sweet, and it doesn't have much to dissect. What you see is what you get, and this one's worth checking out, that's for sure. The music for The Suffering was done by Eric Aho. I think I'm pronouncing that right? And it follows an interesting design philosophy. According to him, he wanted a lot of the music to be composed mostly from sounds from objects that came right out of the environment. It sets a tone for some more intense scenes, that's for sure, but I have to admit, maybe this is just a personal preference, but I think outside of these scenes, the strategy doesn't land as well for me. These tracks played during some of the events in the game are pretty decent, but throughout much of the game, you're kind of either in silence or such gentle ambient music that you kind of forget it's even there. In fact, I don't even remember what most of the game's music sounded like until I was watching it back in the footage here for the purpose of making this video. Hell, I actually rewrote and re-recorded this entire segment during the editing process because I felt my original take wasn't being entirely fair to the game's sound design. There is a decent soundtrack here, but I think it just wasn't used appropriately. But even if it was, it's really not much to write home about in my opinion. Music is always a personal taste thing, that's for sure, and as I mentioned already, it's not bad by any means, it's just forgettable. I would be somewhat surprised to hear anyone put the Suffering soundtrack at their top 10 video game soundtracks, that's for sure. It gets the job done though, and I suppose that's all that matters. Outside of this though, the game actually has some pretty great voice acting, or at least great for the time. I wish there was more to say about the sound design, but it's just passable, that's it. If you saw my Astrobot video, then you know what I'm talking about when I say games put a lot of effort in sound design and focus in other areas. This is one that focuses on other areas. It's not inherently a bad thing. What the game lacks in sound department, it makes up for many others. I mean, it could be worse. You could be listening to the same dumb one-liners over and over again. And no, I'm not going to forget about Duke Nukem Forever. We should never forget what was taken from us. I have to admit, this game has perhaps one of the strangest unlockables that I've seen in a game. When you finish the game, you gain access to an alternate opening level for the game, where Torque just massacres a bunch of inmates who are intending on killing him upon entering the prison. Supposedly it was a prologue level that they were considering cutting, but decided to put it back in after you finish the game, and I have no clue why this edition was made. Maybe they're scratching their heads for what could possibly be a reward for completing this game. Either way, it's astounding, because this edition not only adds nothing, it actually subtracts from the game. This section adds nothing of value to the story, and it sort of ruins the nuance of Torque finding out that he can turn into this creature later in the game by doing it right away. Not to mention, from a story standpoint, it makes no sense how a bunch of people just dropped off at the prison, managed to sneak in multiple stabbing weapons, and the guards don't just break up a fight where they're standing there watching. I get that people will say the American prison system is corrupt, but this is just taking the absolute piss. I legitimately can't think of any way that this additional level adds to the game in any meaningful way. It should have just stayed cut from the game. It's not even that long either, lasting only a few minutes. Outside of the prologue level though, you get a few videos about the making of the game and the inspiration for it. It's all pretty interesting stuff and worth a watch, and if you're really into the nitty-gritty of game development, it's really fun and entertaining. Me, I'm not a game developer and I know next to nothing about how games are made, but I could still find it to be thought-provoking. It talks a lot about the design choices around the player character and trying to differentiate themselves from other titles of the time. It's worth watching, really. You can also play the game again to try and get the different endings or see how your choices to spare or kill certain NPCs change certain parts of the game, but admittedly, the game doesn't change too much based on your choices outside of the ending. This game won't take you too long to beat. I think I did it in less than 10 hours, and that's only because I got stuck a few times. It might be worth replaying though, solely to have a good time, and that's really what it's all about, isn't it? Having fun. The Suffering definitely isn't going to break my top 10 when it comes to video games, but it definitely is one of that I walked away with a good feeling. I didn't feel like my time was wasted, otherwise this video would have sounded much like my Double Dragon 3 video. It's a game that's definitely aged a bit, and while I wouldn't say it's aged like fine wine, it hasn't exactly aged like milk either. It has a few shortcomings, but the charm is able to shine through and make you enjoy what you're playing. I can sense the effort put behind it, and it wasn't just crapped out an assembly line like the most open world adventure titles that are being pumped out these days. That is all the time we have for The Suffering though, but real quick before I end the video, I want to give a small segment here to thank everyone who gave me feedback in my last video. Believe it or not, I take all critique, positive and negative, into account, and while I might not always know how to interpret it, I try my best. I hear every one of you, and I want to try to make these videos the kind that people really can enjoy, and the feedback helps me do that. Everyone was super constructive, and I greatly appreciate that. I don't make videos full time, sadly, and I'm in a transitional phase in my life, which makes finding the time to do these videos quite a challenge. But I try to put one out every 3 weeks, and that doesn't leave a lot of time for scripting them, so sometimes I do feel like my own scripts feel a bit rushed at times, maybe even this one included. I'm working to improve what I do, and for the most part, up to this point, has been focusing on the visual side of things and audio quality. I know my actual scripts need some work, but I do appreciate having the patience with me while I try to find the right balance between making these videos enjoyable. I'm trying to find the right blend between analysis that doesn't dig too deep to the territory of being pretentious and not being too surface level. That being said, I appreciate all the comments and I try to read and reply to all of them. I didn't get the chance to apply them as much to this video because it was already so late in production when I saw many of your comments, but I do know that I'm going to keep considering them going forward, so please don't stop leaving feedback. I do appreciate it. A big thank you to everyone who watches my videos and subscribed. It means a whole lot to me and I appreciate all of you. Let me know what you guys think about The Suffering, or if you've even heard of this game. This has been Wisplay, and that's enough of that.